Hello everyone, my name's Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today I'm going to be talking about a handful of books that I found disturbing. Stay tuned. Before we begin, let's just talk about what I mean by disturbing and disturbing books. This is not books that make you scared necessarily. It's not books that disgust you, but it's books that basically make you anxious or unsettled or nervous or worried, and something that you've read will stick with you and make you very uncomfortable. For me, that's what disturbing books are. And of course there's different levels. Might read a book that just makes you kind of worried, doesn't make you feel good inside, and then there are other books that might give you a full-blown anxiety attack, that subject matter is just so harsh. It's also important to differentiate between the fact that different people find different things disturbing. I don't read a lot of extreme horror. People that read that kind of horror might have sort of a much higher tolerance for certain things, for certain trigger warnings than other people. For example, books that have animal violence. I know that turns a lot of people off, and that might be disturbing for some. But for me, even though I don't enjoy it particularly, I can still get through the book as a result. And also some people that are on booktube talk about disturbing books, and they bring up books that are newer titles, like there's a title called Cows, which I haven't read and I don't plan to read. These are not books that I'm going to talk about today. These are books that I've read that you might not have heard of, that I found particularly disturbing for one way or another. And I'm not going to read about a book that I've just finished recently, and that is American Psycho, which is probably the most disturbing book that I've ever read. And I'm going to save that for a review fairly soon. Okay, first of all I'm going to start with one that is my one and only Stephen King entry on this list. And it's a little novella, not so little, in some case some people actually call it a novel because of its length. But it's a novella, and it is not spoken about on booktube. When people talk about a disturbing Stephen King book, they might think about Pet Sematary or Cujo. I'm going to be talking about Apt Pupil, which is found in different seasons. Now, this is the interesting one because it is not overly gory. There's not much supernatural stuff involved. What it really comes down to is this boy called Todd, and he's a teenager. And he's the all-American boy, kind of blue-eyed boy. He gets very good grades at school. He does very well in sports. His parents love him. He's just got everything going for him. And on his paper rounds, one day, he happens to stop at this elderly gentleman's house. And because he was at a friend's house and was looking through World War II magazines, he recognizes this man who's actually a war criminal. He's a Nazi war criminal who's been hiding away from the authorities. There's been a manhunt on for him, and he's just hiding in plain sight. Now this boy Todd recognizes this man, and he decides to blackmail him because he's curious, and that's a mistake on his part. He wants to know things. He wants to know things about this man, so he blackmails him. He threatens to turn him into the authorities, or the alternative is for this man, this Nazi war criminal, to tell him everything he knows about being a Nazi, about actually operating in gas chambers, the Holocaust, everything like that. And so begins a journey into darkness. And really, they just feed off each other's fears and feed off each other's. It's a very hectic story. And as I say, I never hear it mentioned at all. And there are trigger warnings for animal violence, for sexual cruelty, and very frank discussions about Holocaust victims and what people went through at that particular time. So yeah, be warned. Interesting fact about Apt Pupil is that it was made into a movie, and actually it was a pretty good movie with some good actors, but there was a bit of controversy around the movie, and there were a couple of lawsuits because apparently minors were involved in this shower scene, and there was complaints, and the studio got into all sorts of trouble with this particular movie. And I think there were even more lawsuits at a later stage because it was found out that these minors were overworked. So yeah, the film got in a bit of trouble for that. But this is still a book, a novella that you should check out. But be warned, it is pretty damn disturbing. Okay, the second book that I want to talk about is one that I have mentioned earlier on in the year, and that is Ian Banks' The Wasp Factory. Now, this is supposed to be like a dark humor, satire sort of thing, but it is pretty hectic and huge trigger warnings for animal violence. In fact, there's no book I've read that applies to it more than this particular book. There are scenes of this boy pretty much killing everything around him. So yeah, it's very, very, very cool in that sense. It's about a very strange boy called Frank, and he lives with his eccentric father, and they live in a little Scottish village just off from the village, in a very kind of isolated area. And to say Frank is unusual is not particularly the truth. I want to read something to you very quickly, just to give you an idea about Frank. 2 years after I killed Blythe, I murdered my young brother, Paul, for quite different and more fundamental reasons than I disposed of Blythe. And then a year after that, I did for my young cousin, Esmeralda, more or less on a whim. That's my score to date, 3. I haven't killed anybody for years and don't intend to ever again. It was just a stage I was going through. You basically, in the mind of this boy, I think he's 16 at the time, Frank, and the story is told through his eyes, and you basically take this journey with him, and he looks back and he describes these killings, but at the same time, in the present, he has these very weird rituals, almost sort of a protection thing, a control thing, obsessive compulsive, I don't know what it is, but he goes around the island mounting animal heads on sticks or stakes, and he has these very strange rituals. He almost creates his own sort of religion, and it involves also this wasp factory on the title. I'm not going to tell you what the wasp factory is, because that would be giving it away and giving away spoilers, but it is central to his whole mental thing. All these rituals that he's doing. And at the same time, he has a brother called Eric, who's probably more batshit crazy than he is, and he's escaped from a psychiatric mental institution, and he's on his way home. Now Eric, I'm not even going to tell you what he does. He does things to dogs, he did things to babies. It's a messed up book, and it doesn't really relent. The only kind of thing the fact that you're in this Frank's head, you almost become complicit in his crimes, but he also has a kind of almost a sympathetic voice, so you kind of go along with him, and in a way you don't take sides with him, but you do, yeah, you kind of sympathize with him. But as I say, yeah, it's a messed up story, and excuse my dog scratching herself in the background, but yeah, only pick it up if you dare. That's the Wasp Factory. Okay, this next one is not a book that I particularly enjoyed. I'm just going to come out and say that. I think I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. But there are some seriously messed up stories, and there's some messed up crap happening in this book. And that is Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, I apologize. And this is like a step back cover. Now, this is a collection of short stories, and I think it should have been kept at that. But they tied together by this basically central thing about these very weird, unsympathetic, unlikable, crazy characters that descend on this writer's retreat in order to write their masterpiece. So they lock themselves away, I think, for 3 months, and apparently food and everything is provided. They end up in this old, I think it's a cathedral, it's an old theatre, and they're locked away with dwindling supplies, sources, food, light, heat, and they have to tell their stories. And those are the short stories in this book. Now, there are some pretty good short stories in this book, but none more so than the opening story, which is infamous, and it's called Guts. Now, this book looks at teenage boys' masturbatory fantasies and just takes it with that idea and runs with it. And it involves a swimming pool. I'm not going to say anything more than that. And it is frickin' disgusting. And some people might say it's just hilariously funny, ha ha. And yeah, it is funny. But it is also, on one level, kind of disturbing and sick and worrying that the author would write a story like this. And the interesting thing about this particular author is that on some of his signings, in some of his live book signings, when he was reading the story Guts aloud, some of his audience vomited, some of them fainted, and some ran away. I'm not sure of any numbers or so on, but this is just something that I've heard. There are some other good stories in here, but there's also, to be honest, some very crap stories. So it's kind of uneven, but it does get dark. And even the central story gets ridiculously dark. But you really don't care about these characters. What they do to each other, what they do to themselves is sick. But yeah, it's a strange story. And I've heard that this author has produced some excellent work. I think he wrote Fight Club. But if there's anything else you can let me know about that I should read, I'll look it up. That is Haunted. Okay, the next book I spoke about recently, but I cannot leave it off this list. And it's a one book out of all of these books that I found flat out terrifying. And that was Off Season. Now, yeah, terror and fear and disturbing might be slightly different, but this book was terrifying to the point of being anxiety inducing, terrifying, just making me feel so unsettled. And it's a kind of story that stayed with me afterwards. I think I've told you what the story is about. It's basically these 6 New Yorkers, and they go to northern Maine, and they stay in this sort of cabin in the woods, and they run into a lovely bunch of inbred cannibals who have been on the island for centuries and just like to induce terror and tenderize, because of the terror, tenderize the flesh and eat human people. Now, I think other writers, if they try to write a story like this, it might not have been as effective, but I think that Jack Ketchum's writing in this book was just so brilliant, just so well paced. It just builds the tension, builds the characters, that by the time you get to all the gory stuff, it is so visceral and it is so terrifying. And on a level, it is so disturbing. Some of these things that happen to these women, and this was one scene in this cave. But yeah, I'm not going to spoil it for you. But yeah, I really want to read more Jack Ketchum. I'm thinking of The Girl Next Door, but I'm kind of a little bit nervous about that. I think I might try with something else, like I think there's a book called Red, where this guy's dog gets killed and then he goes on a vengeance spree, I think. But I'm definitely going to read more from this author. So that is Off Season. Just the interesting thing about Off Season, if I can remember. Oh yeah, no, I'd love to get my hand on the original 1980s version, because obviously it was cut by publishers. They say it wasn't suitable for audiences. So I think they call it the unexpurgated version, the 1980 version that he wrote, the first version. That is what I'd love to get my hands on. So yeah, that's off season. Okay, next up we have Are You Loathsome Tonight by Poppy Z. Bright. Now, this is his collection of short stories. I can only describe it as LGBT, erotic splatterpunk, with plenty of blood and gore, very dark matter, and yeah, I found this kind of disturbing, but also uneven. And I know he's a writer that has written other books that apparently are held in very high regard by the horror community, and I'd like to know what those are, so please let me know in the comments below if there's any other that I should read, some of his long novels. But yeah, this collection was a little bit uneven, but it's on this list because of two stories that really stand out for me. The first of those being a story called Saved. And all I can say about this story is the moral of the story is don't mix guns with sex, literally. It is actually a very sad, heartbreaking ending, very over the top, but it really hit me. So yeah, that's one of them. The other one is Self-Made Man. Now this is a nod to Jeffrey Dahmer, not my idol, don't worry, but really takes a very strange turn. This man that obviously is feeding on other men, but something happens and it has almost a little supernatural thing and it becomes like a cannibal stroke zombie thing. It was incredibly gross, but also very effective. He writes incredibly well, and I would love to get more hold of some of the novels in the future. So yeah, that's Poppy Z. Bright, Are You Loathsome Tonight? Okay everyone, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed that. Have you read any of those? I think I'm going to put some of those on my community channel as a little bit of a poll. What is the most disturbing book that you've ever read? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed my content, please be sure to like and subscribe. And take care of yourselves. Keep those pages turning, and cheers.